And when we came close to them, we called the names. And usually they climb up trees because they were not totally sure who is coming. But when they realized that it's their foster parents, they climbed down the tree, came to us close, but they were still a little bit conspicuous. What is going on? And they were totally relaxed the moment they touched my face with their paws. In that moment, they were relaxed. Ah, it's you, Ulf. I knew it. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today with another fantastic episode with somebody who's going to talk to us about something that's really cool, awesome, cute, wonderful. We're going to talk about raccoons. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody out there?
Okay, my name is Ulf Hohmann. I'm from Germany, and I'm studying raccoons since the 90s, so it's a bit long time. Yeah, that's everything.
That's it.
You should know.
So what made you want to study raccoons?
You mean why?
Yeah, like what led you to be interested in that field of study?
It was an empty page. Nobody knows a lot about raccoons in that time. So that was a challenge for a young scientist to start working on a species which has hardly been studied before. So that was the main reason.
Do you feel like they get a bad reputation from the world at large? Do you think they're underappreciated?
They have a bad picture. They have a bad attitude. Most people do have a bad attitude towards raccoons in that time. I think it's still like that. But on the other hand, from a biologist's point of view, they're very, very interesting, very curious, very interesting species, intelligent mammals. So maybe it was a bit of both. On one hand, I wanted to study this animal. On the other hand, I wanted to change maybe a little bit the picture they have in other people's mind.
As far as intelligence goes, from what I see, and I love to watch animal behavior, they seem to be right up there with any other of our, like maybe animal companions, like dogs or stuff like this. Do you find that they are just as intelligent as creatures like that?
Oh, yes, at least like dogs. They have 4 paws, very much like humans. So you can compare them to monkeys. Better maybe than to dogs, because they have these 4 paws and they can manipulate objects with the 4 paws. So it's a little bit like monkeys. Why are you laughing?
Well, I already have this mental picture of a raccoon, because you see them all the time too. The way that they'll touch stuff, and they won't even look at it, but they'll touch it and they'll get a feeling for it. What's going on in the raccoon brain when he does stuff like this?
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit like, in our brain, the optical sense is the leading sense. If we are interested in an object, we look at it. We look at it before we touch it. And with the raccoon, it seems to be the opposite. He first has to touch it before he is looking on it. There's a nice story, give you an impression how they work. When we have tame raccoons, we had raccoons that were we kept them as they were babies, and then they released them to the wild so that they could behave like a wild raccoon, but they were used to humans, so they allowed us to follow them in the wild. So every now and then we try to get in touch with them when they are roaming in the forests, and sometimes weeks in between. And when we came close to them, we called the names, and usually they climb up trees because they were not totally sure who is coming. But when they realized that it's their foster parents, they climbed down the tree, came to us close, but they were still a little bit conspicuous. What is going on? And they were totally relaxed the moment they touched my face with their paws. In that moment, they were relaxed. Ah, it's you, Ulf. I knew it. So
Wow.
That gives you how they function.
Yeah. So a little bit more like a blind person who has to touch everything to see, oh, what is this? What is this? That's really interesting.
Right.
Do you find that their eyesight is just not that good, or it's just so happens that their sensories are more just touch oriented?
I think it's just that the touch sense is so well developed that the eye sense is not that important. But I think in terms of vision, they are not very bad, even better than humans in twilight, because they have a good sense for gray shades. They do not see colors, as far as I know. But this is typical for nocturnal mammals, and mostly don't see colors. It's more typical for fruit-eating mammals like monkeys, and for sure diurnal animals. But the nocturnal mammals, like a nocturnal mammal, they don't see colors. But that's it. Otherwise, I think they have a very good accommodation when you have objects close to them, which is important. If they manipulate objects, they have to look on them. So these things make them very good in vision, I think, just the thing with the color.
So they're nocturnal, which means for everybody out there may not know what that means, they stay up at night. And so what do they go out and do? I have a feeling that they need to eat a certain diet of certain stuff. What are they out there doing at night, and what are they eating, and what are they eating?
They are omnivorous mammals, so they can eat actually everything. They like what humans like. They like sweets, they like meat, they like beetles, earthworms. So strawberries, they are very individual. I had a tame raccoon, which doesn't like snails. And another one was really fond of them. And they were sips. So yeah, it's a little bit like with us. They eat everything, like we, and they like sweets. They like, this is a very important food for them: acorns and beech nuts and chestnuts, things like that.
Interesting.
High energy content.
We find that a lot of our forest land creatures love the acorns, the boars and the squirrels. Everybody really gets a lot of energy from that.
Right.
Yeah. They're wonderful, wonderful animals. And so you're in Germany. You know, they're not really native to Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, they are originally. They came from the North America. They occur naturally from Canada in the north to Central America. And in the almost 100 years ago, they were translocated to places in Europe, mostly in that time as a fur bearer. I don't know how you pronunciate it. Fur bearer?
It's a fur bearer, yeah.
Yeah. So they breed raccoons for fur. And that was in the Weimarer Republic in that time, 20s, 30s. And in that time, eventually some escaped. But on purpose, they also released raccoons to the wild in the 1934. I think that was in that time, when a forest district not far away from Kassel, where you're living, they released raccoon on purpose to introduce them to the nature. And in that time, they asked for permission, the Forestry Service. And they got the permission, and the authorities said, okay, you can release. I think it was 2 pairs. One of the females was pregnant at that time. You can release them, but please give us a report 1 year later, how they behave, how they're doing. And we will see how we decide after that. And so they released these few raccoons close to the Eder Sea. And after 1 year, they had to report that they don't know anything about them anymore because they haven't seen them. Then the Second World War started, people in Germany and in Europe had other problems than looking for raccoons. And after the World War ended in the 50s, people were asking what happened with these raccoons released some years ago. And nobody knows really what happened to them, but some gardeners complained about stolen apples and things like that in their orchards. And that was the raccoon. So they were doing well in these North Hesse forests and were reproducing. And I think in the very beginning, in the 50s, hunters were not allowed to shoot them because they were protected in that time. But when they realized that they're doing very well, that the populations are increasing, they start hunting them. I think with the idea to get the population managed somehow. But this didn't work at all, as we know today. I think in these times they shoot. The harvest was something around 200, 300 raccoons in the 50s and the 60s. And then it increased to 1,000, then it increased to 10,000. And nowadays we have 100,000 of raccoons, just harvested raccoons. And they are distributed all over Germany. And meanwhile, they also entered all the neighboring countries to Germany. So Denmark, Poland, Austria, France, Switzerland, and so on and so forth.
So in your professional opinion, was that a bad move to try to, manipulate the biodiversity doing this, or are they doing fine? Or are they invasive?
Yeah, they are officially invasive now. The EU declared them as an invasive species, as an invasive alien species. The problem is that, okay, let's try to answer the first question. What is my opinion about that? I think if we could make the decision once again, I would say no. Just let them in America. They don't have to come to Europe necessarily. As you said, it's a manipulation of biodiversity, and we still don't know what they really have, which effect they really have on the native wildlife. We have some experience now. They are 100 years now here. But it's a still ongoing debate about the effect of raccoons here. So if you could make the decision once again, I would say, no, don't do it. But now they are here and we have to come along with it. This is, as I said, it's a discussion, an ongoing discussion of the effect of raccoons on the biodiversity. The EU said they are invasive. And the member states have to get rid of them again. But this is impossible. Mm-hmm. I think all the experts will agree with me that we can't get rid of this species anymore. They will be part of our native wildlife in the next generations. So we have to come along with them, if we like it or if we don't like it.
So, but what do you stand on, like this consensus? Like some people say, the hunters especially, they want to find an excuse to go out and hunt whatever animal they say, well, we're going to keep the population down. But then there's some evidence that suggests that raccoons can mitigate their own population numbers on their own. So what's true here?
I'm a hunter as well, so I can understand hunter's psychology a bit more, maybe. And I think many hunters just want to have an excuse to go out and shoot animals. But seriously, I would say we have to differentiate here. In general, I think the population is not, we are not able to manage the population by hunting. Locally, maybe yes. And locally, it maybe is very necessary to manage the population. There's one very, my computer went down. There's one good example. There is a special turtle in Europe, Europäische Sumpfschildkröte in German. Is very common in the Mediterranean areas, but very rare in north of the Alps. So in Germany, there are just a few populations left. and they very much suffered from draining wet areas. So it's a man-made problem. But they are not able to come along with raccoons. Raccoons are very skilled in finding the eggs and even killing the adult turtles. And so the raccoon can be, in Germany you say the Sargnagel, the letzte Sargnagel. So, I don't know the English.
The letzte Sargnagel, the last something.
Yeah, if you bury somebody, you have a sarg. In the how do you call that? It's the last thing that can happen to this turtle, the raccoon.
Okay.
He will be the last.
The last thing you see.
Yeah. So we have to do whatever. We have to protect this very rare species, and the raccoon is also one of the species that has to be managed in the breeding areas of this reptile. So locally, we have, this is just one example. There are many other examples of animals that might get a problem with raccoons because they just don't. They are just not able to avoid predation by raccoons. Another example is the swift. The swift usually breeds under roofs, but there are a few populations of swifts that breed in trees. And the raccoons are very skilled in finding these trees where these swifts breed and to kill the eggs, the chicks or the adults as well. And so nature protective people have to protect these breeding trees. But to do both, protecting the breeding trees on one side and to manage the population on the other side, which always means killing some of the raccoons locally. But in general, I think it's not possible to manage the population. I think this is an important point to say, get rid of the idea to get this population in Europe eradicated. This is not possible. But this does not mean that we don't have to manage this population. On a local scale, yes, I think so. We have to do something.
There's a similar story with the cane toad in Australia where it got brought from somewhere else and it was a mistake that we made, and then now they're just in really rough shape because of how much they're eating the other animals and stuff. So, and as cute as the raccoons are, do you think that humans need to sometimes play some role in intervening in biodiversity in order to like level the playing field?
Right.
A natural socialist order just to even out the playing field for everybody. So what is in German, the raccoon is called Waschbär. This is a funny name. What does that translate to in German from to English?
Waschbär means, I think it's, if you translate it to English, it's washing bear, something like that.
Right.
A bear that is washing something.
What? How did you get that name?
Yeah, that's a funny story. You know why the raccoons are called raccoons in America?
I don't.
It's as far as I know, it's an Indian fairy tale. Well, let's say that the Indians called these animals Raccoonum in their language, in their local language. And Raccoonum means the animal that can see with the hands. And the first settlers from Europe heard Raccoonum. They couldn't translate it or couldn't pronounce it in the right way, so they shorted up to raccoon. So it's actually an Indian name.
Wow.
Raccoon. And I think the Indians, they were very clever with this name because that hits the point much more than Waschbär. And not only the Germans called this animal Waschbär, many other countries in Europe called them similarly. In French, it's a raton laveur, which means probably the same, just bear. They say a small rat, raton. But laveur is also washing. So why does we think they wash something? The Indians knew it better, but what was the story behind it? And probably the reason is the following: if you capture raccoons from the wild and you put them into captivity, because they are very intelligent, they need to do something. They are very quickly bored, and what they don't like is just getting food presented to consume it. They need to look for it. They need to search for it. And if you just give them their food, to train the brain, they put the food into the water to do something with the food, to feel it, because feeling food is so important for them. And the people that kept these animals saw this behavior, and they thought they're washing it. So that was probably the reason why they named them Waschbär, because they saw them manipulating the food items in the water. In nature, this very sensitive forepores have that's the main reason why they have this high sensitivity in the forepores, is to search for food underwater. The smell doesn't work, the eye vision doesn't work, the ears doesn't work, but the feeling is still working underwater. So you can see raccoons very often in the nature walking along shallow water with a head above the sea level or the water level and the front paws below the water. So the senses, eye, ears, and smell are able to observe the environment for enemies, and the front paws doing their job looking for food. And this is a very clever strategy, and that they can do this for hours in the forest. We observe them for hours. Even it's very, very cold, and the water itself is very cold, they still can feel on a very high level, use their front paws for looking for food. It's still a miracle how they do it, because the water is so cold that our hands won't function at that temperature. But the raccoon hands still can do it, and nobody knows how they do it.
Well, hopefully you'll find out in the future.
Yeah, I think, not me, but that's would be an interesting field for researchers, yeah.
So you're working in this field, you're working with animals, zoology, biology, whatever you want to call it. Does when you go to look at some of the wild animals and stuff, does it ever shake your faith in humanity, knowing that humanity does so much to kind of make it harder for wildlife?
You mean whether it will touch me seeing humans destroying the environment?
Yeah.
Is that your question?
Pretty much.
Yeah, sure. I all I can do is, as a researcher, offering facts, offering knowledge to those people who have to make the decisions, and I just hope that they do the right decisions. And my job is to deliver good knowledge. That is what I'm doing right now. I'm no longer working on raccoons at the moment, but I'm busy with other issues, like you mentioned the boar. The boar is a big problem at the moment in Europe. African swine fever is a big issue. And so this is one of my fields of working at the moment.
Interesting. So diseases, communicable diseases between wild animals. I heard another thing about rabies. Rabies is a thing that we need to do something to the wild animal population so this doesn't spread. But how do you do it? How do you inoculate it in a wild animal?
First of all, we don't have a raccoon rabies in Europe.
Okay.
That is very important to know. We have raccoon rabies in Canada and in the United States. As far as I know, it's still an ongoing issue there. When I visited Canada and the United States in the 90s for raccoon research, rabies control was a big issue there. And I think it's still though like that. Maybe they're doing better, but it's still a problem. Here in Europe, we don't have the raccoon strain of rabies. We have a bat strain, a fox strain, and eventually I'm not a veterinarian, but as far as I know, these strains can also be transmitted to raccoons, and raccoons can also get rabies from those bats or foxes. But it's not the kind of virus that is perfectly adapted to raccoons. So it's a dead end road from the point of view of the virus, the raccoon. If the raccoon gets a rabies strain from bats or red foxes, it's a dead end road, because usually they will die quickly, and that's it. It's a totally different story if raccoons get the rabies from raccoons, which is the raccoon strain. They behave differently. They behave more like they should behave to transmit the virus to other raccoons. As you know, the virus manipulates the brain of the infected animal to behave to get transmitted to others. They lose shyness, they start biting, and this is exactly what the virus wants. So rabies is not a big thing here in Europe at the moment for raccoons, and I hope it will be like that for the next centuries.
Only unless a raccoon comes over on vacation on the Lufthansa.
Hopefully not. Yes, there are other diseases like distemper, which is we don't know much about distemper in raccoons, but they do have it, and locally they can be heavily affected by this disease. Yes.
So as far as the boars, what are the things that are really affecting the boars at the moment?
Pardon?
The boars, the wild pigs. What you say you're studying that now? What are some of the threats for these guys? You said something about swine fever, African swine fever. What's the current consensus on that?
The African swine fever is not a big problem for the wild boar itself. For sure, this disease can kill boar locally, usually, but it's more a problem for the agricultural industry, especially for the pig farming industry, because after EU law, if you have African swine fever in an area, you have to slaughter all the domestic pig farms, the pigs in these farms, and so on and so forth. So it's more an economic problem for the agricultural industry, not so much for the wild boar itself.
Interesting.
But for the wild boar, it's a very cruel disease. They die very quickly by bleeding and high fever, and over years this disease can reduce the population locally. But from a general point of view, they could come along with this disease somehow. The wild boar, it's more a problem for the agricultural.
Interesting. I do interview quite a bit of people, and we're supposed to be rethinking based on the recent science about everything about our industrial agriculture system, from the way we treat our soil to the animal husbandry and everything. So I am now one of those vegan idiots, and I'm quite happy. It's been a year or so, easier than I thought. I don't know. I feel healthier, so. I always encourage it, because animals are pretty wonderful things, and half of this podcast is me trying to get people like you to tell me wonderful facts about animals, and I hope we did some good here today.
Okay.
Is there anything you want to add about anything, raccoons, anything at all? Maybe where we can find your work, or
where do I have my book? I wrote a book on raccoons, but I don't have it. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, well, hold that up. And what's it called?
Der Waschbär, for sure.
Okay, Der Waschbär. For all you German folks out there, is it translated in English?
It's written in German.
Okay.
And we, together with some colleagues, we wrote an article on raccoons, on the current knowledge of raccoon research and ecology and management for the European Handbook of Mammals, which will be released hopefully next year, so that all those people who are interested in what we know on that species in Europe should have a look on that article in this Handbook of Europe's Handbook. How it's called? European Handbook of Mammals. No, Mammal Handbook. Mammal Handbook. I don't know how it's the right name of it.
Good. Google it, everybody.
Anyway.
So, and one last question: if we find a raccoon in the wild and we're crossing paths, what's the code of conduct? What should I be doing? Just leave him alone?
It depends. Yeah, if it's an adult, keep him alone, because they won't like to be in captivity anyway. So it's a wild animal, and we should treat it like a wild animal. So if you find an animal out there, leave it. I would say the same with young ones. Very often, people think they were alone, they don't have the mother anymore. But usually the mother's just hiding somewhere and just waiting that you go on, and then she will come to the cup and take it. So in most cases, I would say it's the better decision just to leave them where they are. Okay. Not to keep them in captivity, because they in the very first months they're very cute as a pet, but when they become sexual mature, the picture will change totally, and you have to castrate them, otherwise you will have a bad time with them. And even if they are castrated, usually they will die very quickly because of adipositas. They will get very fat, and then they will die by heart attacks or whatever. So they are not a good species for keep it in captivity.
I had that feeling, although I see plenty of videos on the internet of Russians who have their raccoon pets and stuff, and they are just overweight. And I think people get blinded by their own emotions. They think, well, I think I can take care of this, but you take care of it in the sense that human beings want to take care of human beings. Don't feed them hamburgers and shit like this. We need to have a different relationship to nature and wild animals than wanting them to be like us.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. Well, we'll have you back in the future. We can talk about all your upcoming research, because we love what you do, and we're so appreciative that you take the time to look at these creatures a little closer. So thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Can you say your name one more time before we go?
My name?
Yes.
Ulf Hohmann. Ulf Hohmann.
Ulf. I'll never say it right, but that's all right. That's all right. All right. Wave goodbye to everybody. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming. Bye.